Iain and Damon.
Yes.
What about that? Do you know them?
I do know Iain and Damon. I've known Iain and Damon for a long time because they used to work at Avalon. They used to work on fantasy football. I think both of them. I know Iain particularly. He was a very pretty young man, and I used to enjoy hanging around with him. So I'm looking forward to seeing him again, seeing if he's blossomed into a beautiful older man. He hasn't. So those guys were both sort of working sort of quite low level jobs at Avalon doing fantasy football in the mid 90s when we were doing Lee and Herring stuff. So I met them then. I did audition for the Inbetweeners. I auditioned to be the pervy teacher that Wayne Shepherd played. And I auditioned to be, I think, a mechanic, which was, I should not have had to audition for that role because it was not right for me. I'm not saying the paedophile teacher was right for me either, I didn't get the role, so I'm very upset about that. So I'll be mainly talking to them about why I didn't get the parts in the Inbetweeners. But yeah, and I've talked to Joe Thomas on my podcast. He's a lovely young man. I sort of see him as a young Richard Herring, but more successful. If it's like me, if I'd gone on to be an international film star. But he's a very charming young man. He actually asked to be on my podcast, and then he was a very, very nice. Given how successful he is, he's a very down to earth young man.
Why do you think the Inbetweeners are so successful? Why has it become such a phenomenon that's grossed millions?
I mean, it's the Inbetweeners is a great concept, and I think I remember around that time I was thinking, I wanted to do a sitcom based on 1980s, being at school in the 1980s, and I think that's how the Inbetweeners sprung up. I think they initially were going to do a sort of retro version of their own childhoods. I think the reason it works is because everyone's been at school, everyone knows those characters. They're idiots and they can say terrible things, and you laugh at them, and it works in that way. I think you know what they're doing and saying is unacceptable and tragic, but because they're all such idiots, that makes it funny, and also you identify with them. You remember yourself at school. I had a briefcase at school that I took to school, so I'm very much identified with the briefcase wanker. My dad was my headmaster, so that was that was a terrible time. And it's very funny. It's got, and the actors they cast it brilliantly. All four of them are perfect actually for those characters, and sharp writing, funny writing. And I know Iain, having talked to him, he did base a lot of stuff on his own antics. I think that sort of sliding across the dance hall on his knees thing. When I think I've either talked to him or heard him talking about this, that he was at a wedding and some girl was trying to get off with him, and he was still being this child sliding across the floor on his knees, which I believe one of the characters does in the sitcom. I think they hit the right moment, and it's sort of its time. And I think weirdly, comedy's moved on a little bit, and it'd be interesting to see if it started up now, whether people would find it too un-PC or not. But I don't think they would, because I think that the thing with it is that that's the point of it. But it's in a similar way you'd say David Brent is un-PC. If he was a real person, it would be unacceptable for him to be saying those things in the workplace. And I think with that kids, for it to be realistic, teenagers have to be sort of off the charts, don't they, in terms of what's acceptable.
Why should people come? Why should people come and see this event?
I mean, I think it'll be a great event to come to, because we'll learn more about the creation of the Inbetweeners. We'll get to hear from some behind-the-scenes stories. I hope I'll manage to delve in and find out where they got their disgusting ideas from and how many of them are true life. Joe's a great interviewee, so I'm looking forward to talking to him again. And I think Iain and Damon will have, I think, both interesting stories about the production, but also I'll try and get a little bit into the detail of how you create a groundbreaking sitcom. Just for myself, it'd be nice to be able to do that one day. And I think it's also interesting. I mean, I've done obviously lots and lots of interviews with comedians in my podcast, and I think I know what questions not to ask really, and how to find an interesting way through. because I do the same job as them, I know the questions that they will have heard before, and I'll try not to ask those and try to get some new nuggets out of them about the Inbetweeners, which will be hard because they've talked about it a lot.